Hi friends, let's keep talking about that enormous Nintendo Direct. Obviously, I've already done my full live reaction and then a deep dive episode looking at all the Mario 40th anniversary stuff, but there is so much more to talk about from what was literally the biggest and most jam-packed Direct ever. In the Mario episode, I started to put things into a tier list, so I think we should continue to do that as we go through all the other announcements. I'll cover them in order and give my honest feedback on everything after having time to sit and stew and also do a bit of research on the games mentioned, so I can give a more rounded and nuanced opinion than in my pure live reaction. There were 44 games in the Direct, and that's not even including the 14 Virtual Boy games or compilations of multiple games on the cartridge. Many of these announcements were surprises and some absolute bangers in my opinion. I'm not exaggerating when I say that in my taste specifically, this is probably one of the best Nintendo Directs ever, and it made me feel a lot more assured for the future of the Switch 2, especially when considering the release schedule being slowly now filled out, more system exclusives and first-party titles, which is important. That's something that I covered in my Drag X Drive review, was the extreme lack of first-party titles, especially with release dates. But all of that is now pretty much fixed. Many of those games are actually coming earlier than I honestly expected them to. So I know that there's plenty of reason to be mad at Nintendo or complain about the pricing of certain things, but overall this is good stuff, and I think it's important to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Literally every month from now through till spring, there are multiple new games that could tempt new users to buy, and if you're an early adopter like me, these should definitely make you feel a bit more confident and happy in your existing purchase, even if until now you've been a bit worried. We've all seen those buyer's remorse videos in the last week or two. I've stayed away from that because I'm trying to be more positive. But honestly, I do think that is far, far less of the case for many of us now that we know what is coming up in the near future. I've done my fair share of complaining about Nintendo, and I will keep holding them accountable, but this Direct really was mostly steps in the right direction as far as I'm concerned, even if some of the announcements could have been pitched a bit better to avoid negativity and some of the pricing does seem a bit steep. I'll try to be fair and balanced in my outlook anyway. There is so much to get through, so I'm just going to quickly read the new, updated podcast intro and then dive right into the good stuff. As always, if you skip the intro, I'll let you off, as long as you remember to drop a like while you're at it. It really does go a long way to helping the algorithm to know that you appreciate these episodes, so it's genuinely appreciated. Thank you. Okay, go gadget intro read. Hi everyone, welcome to Daily Switch 2, a podcast covering everything related to the Nintendo Switch 2, attempting to release at least one new episode or video per day to YouTube, Spotify, and your favourite major platforms. My name is Sam, and I've been a gamer since the 1980s. I've worked in the entertainment industry since I was a teenager, including as a games journalist, producer of gaming documentaries and shows, and I'm even programming multiple indie video games, including 4, which will be released on the Switch and hopefully Switch 2, with the first one being announced this October. So be sure to subscribe and follow the show for the world exclusive news on those as they drop, along with some other exciting Nintendo related projects. However, I'm a gamer and Nintendo fan at heart, and this podcast is primarily a passion project for me to talk about the stuff that interests and excites me about this new system. It is not funded by Nintendo or any other entity except my own indie games company, of course, and any sponsors or review copies will be very clearly stated so that I can remain completely unofficial and unbiased and give my full, frank, honest opinions. In general, I fund this entirely by myself. I actually buy the hardware and most of the games that I talk about, so I can give a real objective opinion on if they are worth your cash or not. This means it's obviously an expensive hobby to run the show, so if you do want to support what I'm doing, you can now leave a super thanks or buy me a coffee, but there's no obligation to do so. In this economy and with game prices being what they are, I just really appreciate a like, subscribing, and I try my darndest to read, like, and respond to every comment that you guys leave. We're building a really nice community here, and I absolutely notice returning viewers, so I'm grateful for the continued support. And speaking of communities, I'm in the process of revamping the Patreon and building a YouTube membership option too, coming soon. Watch this space. But please be reassured that I don't believe in paywalls and I will never hide content behind them. And on Patreon, I do offer a completely free tier. Everyone is welcome. There is never any pressure to donate. I just want to build a fun community where you can talk to me and leave suggestions, get the latest news on my own games that I'm developing. And once it gets big enough, I've got some really cool community events planned. I do free monthly giveaways of official Nintendo prizes, toys, trinkets, Pokemon cards, posters, even the occasional Switch game. The first one of those will be in our forthcoming 1000 subscriber special. There is never any paywall, never any cost to enter, so be sure to visit linktree/dailyswitch2 to join the free members area. And for all the ways to listen, watch and support the show, check out that description, pinned comment, or here's that link again. It's super easy, linktree/dailyswitch2. That's linktr.ee/dailyswitch2. Thank you so much, and back to the episode. Right, so quickly recap where we were on the last episode as far as a tier list goes. Not only am I trying to put things into a tier, but also ordering them within that tier. So by the end, we can see a full countdown of my hype list in order. And I'll then compare it to the voted list by Nintendo Life users to see how my own feelings match with a bigger audience. Obviously, only giving tier list entries to actual games, updates or DLC announcements, not things like amiibo or merch, the movie trailer, etc. I'm still annoyed that I keep getting copyright claimed for the movie trailer, no matter how much I try and get around it. So, first up was Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. I did a detailed video breakdown on those, and I talked in a lot of detail about the pros and cons of the collection, the changes, all the improvements, and the price tag. TLDR, I think this is vastly overpriced, especially considering the physical copy is Switch 1 only, making it only the second ever Switch 1 game to sell for $70 rather than $60 or below. And Galaxy 1 and 2 have previously been sold by Nintendo for just $9 each on sale for the Wii U eShop. However, that doesn't change the fact that these are two of the best Nintendo games ever made, and they have both been updated here in ways that arguably make this the best way to play them, official or unofficial. I am especially excited for the fact that Rosalina's storybook gets a new epilogue for Galaxy 1 leading into Galaxy 2, which now has storybook chapters of its own all added to it where they were previously missing. So this is kind of like combining Sonic 3 with Sonic and Knuckles lock-on technology, making that one complete story from start to finish like it always felt that it should be. While it doesn't look like we are getting a physical Switch 2 edition, unfortunately, there is a free performance upgrade for Switch 2 users, which, while we haven't seen any footage of it yet, means that arguably playing this on the Switch 2 with this particular collection will be the ultimate way to play two of my favourite ever Nintendo games. So, while I do feel that the price point is frankly ridiculous, I'm still super hyped for this release, and as we have a physical release, and we have a release date of October the 2nd, looking forward to playing that in just next week, man, time flies, I put it in A tier. Had it been more reasonably priced, or with more games included in the collection, it would have been an S tier, but still, a strong start to the Direct. A tier for Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. Next up was Mario Tennis Fever, a Switch 2 exclusive game, and while I expressed a concern that previous Mario Tennis games have been of a mixed quality, some of them absolutely excellent, but others pretty disappointing, frankly, this one looks to have a really nice big roster, a lot of the Mario-style cartoon zaniness and arcade-style minigame modes that I love, and my biggest request, the return of the RPG mode, hopefully making it a lot more substantial of an experience, especially for single players. The price was confirmed at $70, which is kind of steep for a sports game in my eyes, but it does look pretty substantial, and being that it's a first-party title, I'm glad that Nintendo didn't think that the RPG mode or whatever warranted it being bumped up to $80. Still crazy that we have to even consider that, but hey, this is modern console gaming, I guess. However, I did notice that on the UK eShop at least, the digital version is around $10 cheaper than the physical version. Shh, don't tell Nintendo. If that turns out not to be a mistake and to apply across all eShops, that will be the first time that Nintendo has done that with a first-party title, and it's something that I have been actively campaigning for them to do. So it's a good sign. I just don't want to shout about it too loudly in case it was a mistake and they change it back. I gave this one an A tier too, and I actually placed it ahead of Galaxy 1 and 2, despite how much I love them, because it's a new game, a Switch 2 exclusive, and again, at a semi-reasonable price announced and fixed release date, making it a great announcement overall, frankly. 12th of February. I already made this joke, but it's worth repeating that this comes out just in time for Valentine's Day, but in Mario Tennis, love means nothing. Super Mario Bros. Wonder Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus Meetup at Bellabel Park was the stupid, unnecessarily long title of the next game announced. That's 78 characters for those counting. Nintendo really doesn't do us YouTubers any favours when we somehow have to make an appealing but search bar friendly title in under 100 characters, do they? Mario Wonder is one of my favourite Mario games, 2D or 3D, frankly. Miles more appealing than any of the new Super Mario Bros. Series, in my opinion. And New Super Mario Bros. Was another stupid title too, frankly. That game is 19 years old, for goodness sakes. It just gets confusing calling it new when there are tons of newer Mario games. Okay, rant over. Let's talk about Bellabel Park. I mean, it looked nicely designed and like there's quite a lot of content that's been added, but everything that we've been shown so far is multiplayer only. And frankly, I don't really think that 2D Mario games are ever that great for multiplayer experiences. They are some of the best games of all time for single player, but multiplayer I've never been convinced. So even though I've been hoping for a Switch 2 upgrade to Mario Wonder since the Switch 2 was announced, and frankly I've been hoping for DLC for Mario Wonder ever since it launched on the Switch 1, this isn't exactly what I was hoping for, but the announcer did say, and I quote, "The Nintendo Switch 2 edition adds other new content as well. Look forward to more of that in the future." And we were only given a rough release date of spring 2026 as a window, so I really do hope that between now and then we hear more information and they've actually added more single-player levels to the main game, and we're just slowly being drip-fed the info. In fact, it's a recurring theme of this Direct that was DLC or upgrades announced that seemed underwhelming or disappointing up front, but if you actually paid attention to what was said or the text that was on the screen very briefly, the implication is that more content is coming later, so they would actually be more interesting and expansive than they first appear. It's more like teaser trailers than full trailers. It really was quite head-scratching the way that a lot of this stuff was presented. It's very easy to be excited at the announcement, then disappointed by what was shown, and then miss that it was only a teaser and more is coming down the line. Again, we'll see more of that with later announcements. I really think Nintendo needs to be clearer on how they present this kind of stuff, especially in a Direct, when many people will be watching people doing live reactions and commentary, where it would be very easy to accidentally talk over a single sentence announcement or not see a very short bit of text on screen for a few seconds. I love Mario Wonder. I'm really excited to hear more info about this alleged new content for the actual game and not just Bellabel Park. But as we don't yet have full details of that, nor a fixed release date or a price, I gave this an A tier as well. I placed it above Mario Tennis, perhaps surprisingly, but regular listeners will know that I have a bias towards platform games in general, and frankly, if they had confirmed and showed that this would have new single-player Mario Wonder levels, it would have been an automatic S tier for me, so watch this space, I guess. The last game in the Mario 40th Anniversary section was a brand new Yoshi game, Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. Now, I love Yoshi games. I'm still waiting for a Switch or Switch 2 version of Woolly World, and I'm also dreaming of one day getting a proper 3D Yoshi game. I'm not sure that we'll ever get one for some reason. Nintendo doesn't seem to want to make one, but we did get Kirby, so maybe it'll happen. And I'm 100% up for any new 2D Yoshi game as well. So this one looks really, really nice, frankly. Unique and beautiful graphical style. It looks really cute. The sound was really cute too. I love all the music and everything. It looks like there's a lot of variety to the settings, the level gimmicks, and a puzzle element to the platforming too, which to me is a very, very welcome thing. With no confirmation of price and only a rough release window of spring 2026, that's another one, and we're going to see a lot more of those spring 2026 announcements. It seems like the first half of next year will be pretty busy. But it's another first-party game. It's Switch 2 exclusive, thank goodness. We need more of those to encourage more people to upgrade. So I was pretty hyped about this announcement. I gave it my first S tier of the Direct so far, and deservedly so, I think. Switch 2 exclusive, first-party platform game coming relatively soon, no-brainer. S tier. Right, so that is us up to date with my previously given ratings. Next up, they moved into a Switch 1 section. These games don't have a Switch 2 version available, though presumably will run on the Switch 2. Backwards compatibility isn't 100% guaranteed for older games on the Switch 2. With Switch 1 compatibility, it's not 100%. But with newly releasing games, we can hope that they will be at least tested and confirmed by the devs before they release. It's mostly the older Switch 1 games which seem to have some compatibility issues, and they're slowly getting patched out over time. This is the Daily Switch 2 podcast, and I certainly don't cover all Switch 1 games, but I do cover these live events in full and try to cover every game, so let's go over what was here. First up was Stormlancers. I've got to say, I love the style of the 2D animated intro. This is really well done, and combined with the music, it felt really like an 80s or early 90s cartoon. I especially love the over-designed 80s cartoon-style logo. It's great stuff. One of my pet hates in modern design aesthetics is where logos are minimal and just a basic plain font. Looking at you, Cracker Barrel, lol. I really love custom designed logos, and it's something that I spend a lot of time trying to get right on my own retro style projects. So while I know it's a small thing for most people, I'm impressed that they 100% nailed it here. I can absolutely imagine having this logo on a lunchbox, a pencil case, or pajamas back in the mid to late 80s. It's exactly that kind of vibe. He-Man, Thundercats, Bravestar, Mask, Visionaries. This kind of thing would fit right in. Really, really cool. It's a shame, in my opinion, that the graphics of the game themselves didn't continue that kind of 2D animated style, but instead go for a cel-shaded 3D, 2D, 3D look. Despite being a 2D side-scrolling game, they went for the 2.5D aesthetics. However, the texture work on the environments is really stylish. The game itself is a roguelike, so not really my genre of choice, as regular listeners will know, but this one has been designed specifically for couch co-op, and I do love me some couch co-op. It did look slick, like it ran really well, and the controls, etc. looked very polished. It's from Probably Monsters, which is the studio of the former CEO of Bungie, so that gives me confidence that this is likely to be a quality product. It was shadow dropped the same day as the Direct, so therefore it's out now. Not many professional reviews as yet, but Metacritic has the customer reviews at a 7.3, which isn't bad. And from what I can see, it's a Switch exclusive and only $20, so that's two things very much in its favour as far as I'm concerned. Unfortunately, so far, I don't see any word of a physical release, but it's only just come out. I'm sure if it does well enough, it may get picked up for one in the future. It's a difficult one for me to rate, as personally it's not really my style of game, but I do really like the aesthetic. It looks very polished, and I want to give it bonus points for being exclusive to Nintendo, only $20, and an instantly released shadow drop. So I'm going to place it in B tier. After that, we had Dimkum. At first glance, this looks like the many Animal Crossing cozy clones we get at pretty much every Nintendo-related event since 2020, basically. But this one actually had more personality than many. As soon as I saw the title, I knew it had to be an Aussie game. And yeah, this one wears its Australian outback setting on its sleeve with kangaroos, emus, and the like. The more I watch the trailer, the more I see cool little touches. It looks like it's got some really good ideas and a lot of humour, and also looks like maybe it has more action than the majority of these types of games, with survival elements and action sequences as well as farming and building. There was a demo released on the eShop, so you could try the game right away, which is nice, always appreciated. It's not released immediately, but a release date was given of November the 9th. And if you try the demo and decide that you want to pre-order, there is 10% off. Even without the discount code, it's only $18. So far, I don't see word of a physical version, which is a shame. It's clear from the trailer that a lot of love and passion went into this. It has a real fondness for its Australian roots, and I think it may even be from a solo dev. I see the name James Bendon is the only name mentioned on the Steam page. If this really is the work of a single developer just showing his love for his country or culture, that's really, really cool, because honestly, this is one of the more polished, varied and impressive looking Animal Crossing alikes that we've seen on the Switch. And at $18, that is very reasonable. So I congratulate James, and I really hope that it does well for him. As I mentioned during my live reaction, I've been kind of in the mood to play one of these types of games, so it is on my radar. If it gets a physical release down the line for Switch, I will definitely pick it up. It's not a Switch exclusive, but considering the cheap price, the fact a demo is available, the fact it looks such a varied and polished product, especially if it's from a solo dev, I'm going to place it in A tier. I genuinely really do like the look of it. I can't in all good consciousness put it above the Mario stuff, obviously, but I do think it deserves an A tier. Fair dinkum, as they say in the Upside Down world. Next up, another game that looks surprisingly cool, Popucom. Not sure about that title, but the game itself looks pretty neat. The voiceover on the trailer instantly won me over by describing it as a platform adventure and showing nice, smooth, colourful 3D platforming graphics, and then almost instantly lost me again by describing it as multiplayer only. Shame, but then it kind of won me back around the more I watched, because it's got some really interesting elements. It looks sort of Splatoon-esque, but you are shooting coloured bubbles in a match 3 kind of way, with elements of Puzzle Bobble, aka Bust a Move, crossed with Zuma, but all while being a 3D platformer and avoiding obstacles, etc. I mentioned this during my live reaction, I think, but the Metroidvania that I'm working on myself has a similar colour-based puzzle element while platforming, and I could see that the devs had implemented several similar ideas to me, but with 3D platforming rather than 2D side-scrolling, so I'm not that worried. I thought the graphics looked cool, and I liked a lot of what I saw in the design. If this had a single player mode, I would frankly be all over this, but having it as multiplayer only makes me a lot less interested. If it's cheap and has local multiplayer, I might still pick it up, but if it's literally online multiplayer only, I'm afraid it's not for me. It's not a Switch exclusive. It seems to be coming to other systems, PlayStation 4, 5, PC. And from what I can see, it's already on Steam and has very positive reviews. So it's great that it's coming to Switch as well. I see it has gyro aiming, which is not something I particularly care about, but I know for some people is a massive selling point. So that could make the Switch version maybe the best way to play for some people. On Steam, it looks like it's only $18, so if it's a similar price point on Switch, that will again be a good thing. Although, again, if it's genuinely multiplayer only, it will live or die depending on how many people are playing online, so we will have to hope that it's crossplay. Again, many variables that we don't know yet, but as I genuinely do think it looks like it's doing something quite unique, and it looks polished and has great reviews on the PC version and a reasonable price on other systems, I'm going to put it in A tier as well. Although behind Dimkum, as I'm biased towards single-player stuff, and I really did think that looked neat, and us solo devs have got to stick together, whereas Popucom looks to be from a larger Chinese team, and also I see some DLC being sold, so the cheap price isn't quite as bargainous as with Dimkum. And there's only a vague release date of holiday 2025 and no demo, etc. Still, I've got my eye on this. It looks like it could be a genuinely fun time, and it's got some neat ideas. Mind you, I would say that as I also had some of those very same ideas in my own game I'm working on. Lol, I'm not as original as I thought I was. Tomodatchi Life Living the Dream. When I saw this in the direct, I kind of felt surprised, but also had a sneaking suspicion that we already knew that a Tomodatchi Life game was coming, and I'd just forgotten about it. Perhaps it was rumoured or something, I'm not sure. To be frank, it's not something I personally would have paid much attention to. Tomodatchi is just not a series that I've ever been really interested in, although I know that many people really love it. I do know that it's famous for its quirkiness and its sense of humour. I like that, and I could see a lot of that in the trailer. It did seem to have a lot of personality. It's just that, to me, this kind of genre of life sim is very hit or miss anyway, and I'm afraid the graphical style of the me-type characters has never particularly appealed to me. The basic ones on the original Wii for using in things like, Wii Sports, etc. are inoffensive enough, and I do have some nostalgia for how my kids would like to make Miis based on different members of our family and friend group, and then when I was running around the island on Wii Fit trying to get my steps in, I'd see my mum or whoever running by me waving, and that was kind of cute. But it's a very basic art style, isn't it? And I always felt it was a little bit sterile and corporate to me, personally. I'm sorry to anyone who's a little younger than me and therefore has a lot of nostalgia for them. For me personally, by the time the Wii launched, I was a cynical adult, and the overall minimal aesthetic brought in by Nintendo for the Wii and DS era is by far my least favourite of Nintendo's history, especially after how colourful and fun and unique the GameCube and the GBA era was. But the me-like characters in Tomodatchi Life added a lot more customization options. However, I always found that a lot of the choices were kind of really ugly looking, and when looking at the trailer for this game, I was getting that same kind of ick. It really doesn't look pleasant to my eyes. However, just because it's not for me doesn't mean that I want to gloss over how cool an announcement this is for fans of the series. It's something that I know many people have wanted for a very long time. As far as I know, the last Tomodatchi game was about 10 years ago, I think. Although I know there was Meetopia, which is somewhat similar. Forgive me if it's really not, but I know it was like a life sim with me-style characters. For my own personal hype rating, personally, I would place this in an E tier. I'm afraid it doesn't appeal to me at all. However, I know that it's a huge announcement that will make many people happy. Obviously, it's a Nintendo exclusive title in a series that many fans have been waiting for many years. So for that, I've just got to place it in, a B tier? I know that some fans will still be upset at me for not placing it higher than that, but in my defense, we really didn't get very many details. No details on pricing, if there will be a Switch 2 upgrade, if there will be a physical version. I'd certainly hope so after all this time, but still. And only a spring 2026 release window for now, no date. Even if it's not for me, it is still a very good announcement. So, no duds in the direct so far. Everything keeping a very high standard. Next up, moving out of the Switch 1 only games to a title with both a dedicated Switch 1 and 2 physical release. Now, this is more my speed. Mortal Kombat Legacy Kollection. This was actually something I talked about in my episode where I listed the games that I was most looking forward to. I love the classic Mortal Kombat games. I'm sure 99% of the people listening to this know what the game is, but for those that don't, it's a one-on-one fighting series with an emphasis on over-exaggerated gore and archetypal characters, and the earliest titles used real-life actors digitized into 2D sprites for the humans, and Ray Harryhausen-style stop-motion animation for the mythical characters like Goro, etc. I think almost everyone who was alive at the time has a huge amount of nostalgia for those early titles. They really were a huge cultural landmark. All the controversy around them, the people trying to work out the special moves and especially the finishing moves to show off in the arcades. The Mortal Monday release for the console versions and the controversy with the Mega Drive Genesis versions all having the blood and gore, but the Super Nintendo version being severely neutered. While not many people will let you get away with claiming that Mortal Kombat is a better game than Street Fighter II, its contemporary, it's simply not even slightly. You can have a legitimate argument for at least saying that you personally like it better. Mortal Kombat was its own unique thing. The digitized graphics rather than drawn pixel art, the crazy archetypes and comedy moves, the semi-realistic gore but with Tom and Jerry style violence. It just had so much personality to it. And again, just the aesthetics and the logo design were so cool. That dragon in the circle is just so iconic. It's the kind of thing that basically ever since the 90s I've been one drunken night away from potentially getting it tattooed. Over the years, I've owned and reconditioned several real-life arcade cabinets, both Mortal Kombat 1 and 2. There is just something insanely cool and nostalgic to me about those games. Sadly, I don't currently own one. As some of you will know, I recently moved country, so shipping arcade cabs over would be insanely expensive, and they would probably get damaged in the process. But I do really miss them and often find myself watching them on eBay. Perhaps this time I'll just pick up an arcade one-up instead, as they are easier to come by and cheaper for delivery. I don't know. I also have an unfeasibly large collection of basically every version of Mortal Kombat 1, 2, 3, Ultimate and Trilogy for like every console and computer that they were ever released for. It's just something that I really love. So you might be wondering why I would be so hyped for a collection if I already own the games and have played them a million times. Well, firstly, it's another copy to add to my ever-growing collection, and it'll be fun to have them on the Switch too, be able to play them portably. But also, this is shaping up to be simply one of the best retro games compilations ever. It's from Digital Eclipse, who are well known for excellent emulation quality and even recompilations of old games, and have released some of the absolute best retro compilations ever, including the Mega Man Legacy Collection, Disney Afternoon, Street Fighter 30th, SNK 40th, Ninja Turtles Cowabunga Collection, Atari 50. The presentation of these collections is always impeccable and often comes with a ton of really cool archive stuff and museum content too. This particular Mortal Kombat collection has a lot of that included, with an interactive documentary format that I can't wait to dive into. It's these kind of collections that really make me criticize when Nintendo puts out stuff like Galaxy 1 and 2 or the 3D All-Stars collection in such a bare-bones fashion with almost nothing included other than the games. Sure, they're incredible games, but it feels disrespectful not to really go all out in showcasing the history of them, like these Digital Eclipse releases do. Another really cool thing about this release in general is not only does it have a pretty comprehensive list of games, comprehensive written here with a K, of course, but it has many versions of the games to try out, not just the arcade versions, but several console variants of some of the games too. The most important ones are here, Arcade, Genesis and SNES, but also some deeper cuts like the excellent 32X version of Mortal Kombat 2 and the Game Boy versions of 1 and 2. I've told this story before, but Mortal Kombat is bizarrely actually the reason that I got my DMG Game Boy back in the day. My parents were worried about me playing a gory game like Mortal Kombat on a TV screen and with red blood, but they said that I could have it on the Game Boy because the screen was small and monochrome, so somehow that was less violent. The Game Boy version of Mortal Kombat 1 isn't amazing. But it was all that I was allowed, so I made do. But I'd argue to this day that the Game Boy version of Mortal Kombat 2 is really good. Of course, like a year later, they acquiesced, and I ended up getting Mortal Kombat 1 and 2 for pretty much every system that I owned after that. But I will be forever grateful to Mortal Kombat for getting me into Game Boy in the first place, as I then discovered some of my favourite ever games, the Mario Land and Wario Land games, everything DMG with Kirby in the title, the Zelda Link's Awakening, which is my favourite Zelda game, Donkey Kong 94, just absolutely incredible game, and eventually, of course, Pokemon, all made possible by me buying a Game Boy in order to play Mortal Kombat. I love those kind of weird anecdotal stories that everybody seems to have. The collection doesn't have all the versions that I'd like it to, but it's a pretty great selection, and the games chosen are basically everything that you could hope for, leading up to Mortal Kombat 4 when things all went 3D and temporarily it went downhill. There's 11 games included, with multiple versions of several. Let's break it down. Obviously, there's Mortal Kombat, the original arcade game from 1992, and 4 console versions from 1993. The Genesis version is probably the best version, not just because it has the uncensored gore if you entered the special code to unlock it, which was nominally meant to stop kids accessing it, but of course it was printed in every magazine and the kids shared it on the playground and memorized it by heart. But it's also superior in my opinion because the controls and response times are the best of the contemporary home versions too. The Super Nintendo version is interesting from a historical standpoint to see the Nintendo imposed censoring and how certain moves are swapped out, but also because the graphics are arguably noticeably better, bigger sprites and more colours, but the controls are far worse, sluggish and like there's a delay with them. Still, it's significantly better than the Game Boy version that I grew up with, which feels like you're playing in treacle, and the controls are broken to the point where special moves are basically impossible to pull off with any reliability, and I don't think I ever managed to get a fatality working, even though they are present. There's only 2 backgrounds and missing characters, but despite all that, in some ways it is a very impressive port, at least graphically, with the digitized graphics somehow looking pretty recognizable even though there's only 4 shades of green to represent them. Music sounds quite good too, although perhaps that's just my nostalgia speaking. Nowadays, there is literally no one that would recommend that you play the Game Boy version over pretty much any other alternative, but from a historical interest and archival standpoint, it's really cool that it's here and that more people will be able to check it out, and perhaps I'll get some sympathy that for a year or so, this is the only way that I was allowed to play Mortal Kombat. Also included is the Sega Game Gear version, which is surprisingly good for an 8-bit and notably better than the Game Boy. The frame rate isn't great, but the graphics are surprisingly faithful and large and controls well. The biggest shame, in my opinion, is that the Master System version isn't included. Of course, the Game Gear is basically a portable Master System, but it had a smaller screen resolution, so the game is very cropped and zoomed in on the Game Gear, whereas the Master System version is the superior port. It was never released in the USA or Japan, so maybe that's the reason it's not included here, but if they had the Game Gear emulator working, there's no technical reason not to also include the Master System ROM. It seems a strange omission, frankly. Perhaps more understandable is the lack of the Mega CD version, an enhanced version of the Genesis conversion. It's genuinely a shame that it's missing, and maybe surprising considering they included the 32X version of Mortal Kombat 2. I would assume it may be a licensing issue with something related to either the CD soundtrack or the FMV clips on the CD. Of course, also missing are the home computer ports like DOS, Amiga, etc., but honestly, you aren't really missing much. Obviously, by far, the best way to play the original Mortal Kombat is the arcade version, which is included here, and the Genesis and SNES versions are the ones that people will be the most nostalgic for, so we're all good here. The Game Boy and Game Gear versions are nice novelty additions, and for my specific nostalgia, it's nice to have the Game Boy one. Next up is Mortal Kombat 2, which hit the arcade in late 1993, with the console ports following in 94 to an even bigger campaign fanfare than the first. This really is similar to the difference between Street Fighter 1 and 2. Mortal Kombat 2 took everything that was good about the first game but improved on it in every conceivable way. It's definitely possible to argue that Mortal Kombat 1 is style over substance and people just liked it for its ideas and creativity rather than the gameplay itself, but Mortal Kombat 2 is just inarguably a fantastic game and far more of a challenger to compete with what Capcom and SNK were putting out at the time in the arcades. As well as just looking and playing better, it upped the number of characters, the number of moves, and it really lent into the humour and pantomime gore. If Mortal Kombat 1 was Tom and Jerry, then Mortal Kombat 2 was itchy and scratchy. Obviously, we have the arcade version, which is obviously the one to go for, but the console versions are far more interesting a comparison here than with the first game. This is something people still argue over to this day because it's closer, fighting the console wars over and over about who got the best version back in the 90s. The first Mortal Kombat had been controversial to the point that there was literal US Congress meetings about it. Along with Night Trap and Lethal Enforcers, it was basically responsible for age ratings on video games becoming a thing. During those televised trials, a representative of Nintendo was very outspoken in talking about how the SNES version was censored and Nintendo would never be so irresponsible to release the game uncut. And as for Night Trap, horror of horrors, they said that it would never release on a Nintendo system. It's funny that, as right here on my shelf I have the Nintendo Switch version, but yeah, at the time they were technically correct, but mostly because Nintendo didn't actually have a CD-based system in the 1632 or 64-bit eras, so it would have been impossible anyway. But they thought that by making these big grandstanding moral statements in a court case that they knew would be on TV, that parents would side with Nintendo and it would be good for the company. Of course, what actually happened was it made Nintendo look childish, uncool, and like your parents or teachers to all the kids, and it made Sega look like the edgy, grown-up brand that didn't care, like that one uncle that everyone seems to have that's always letting you play or watch things that you shouldn't. It's hard to explain to those that weren't there at the time, but the neutering of Mortal Kombat 1 on the SNES massively hurt Nintendo's image with kids and really helped the Genesis to become the cool system in the West. Nintendo knew that they'd made a mistake and made sure that the same thing was not repeated with Mortal Kombat 2. Not only was the SNES version completely uncensored, many would argue that it is the best contemporary home port by quite the margin. For me personally, the Genesis version is excellent. You definitely wouldn't have been disappointed if you owned it, but yeah, the SNES version is leagues better. But where it becomes interesting is the 32X version. For those that don't know, the 32X was an upgrade for the Genesis that turned it into a 32-bit system of sorts. And the 32X version of Mortal Kombat 2 played on the Genesis is much, much closer matched to the SNES, and some people, myself included, would argue it's very slightly better. But there isn't really much in it, and both versions have certain things over the other. So it's awesome that this collection has all three versions, so you can easily and quickly switch between them to compare them. I may be biased, as while I owned and loved my SNES, I was also one of the handful of people who actually bought a 32X back in the day, and have huge nostalgia for it, despite people mostly remembering it nowadays as a failure or making jokes about how bad it was. There were great games on the 32X, and during its admittedly very short lifespan, there were some games that justified the purchase, and Mortal Kombat 2 was definitely one of them. It's a great port, but I may be too biased to say whether it's the best or not when comparing it against the SNES version. As I mentioned, they also included the Game Boy version, which was the first version of Mortal Kombat 2 that I personally owned for reasons already mentioned, and as I said, it's surprisingly good. It's obviously not a patch on the 16 or 32-bit versions, but for a monochrome 8-bit portable title from the time, it does a far, far better job at actually being a playable, fun version of the arcade game than Acclaim managed with the first game. Sadly, no Game Gear version this time. Again, perhaps it was just never released in the USA or Japan, I don't know. Again, it's a great version considering the limitations of the 8-bit Sega architecture, but the Master System version, again, is the superior one. A really nice version, even if only a curio nowadays. It's a shame that neither are here, but it's not essential. The home computer and other 32-bit console versions aren't here too, but the 5 versions that they do include are arguably the most important from a historical standpoint. And if you just want the best version to play, you'll be going with the arcade one anyway. 1995's Mortal Kombat 3 was slightly less beloved than 2, but still very well received at the time. It included more real-world settings and slightly less fantasy elements, which some people didn't like. And egregiously, it didn't include fan-favourite Scorpion, and it changed other fan-favourite, in my main, Sub-Zero's design, so he wasn't wearing his iconic mask anymore, and he just looked like a random guy in pyjamas. Sub-Zero and Scorpion were like Mortal Kombat's Ryu and Ken, so messing with them was never really going to be a good idea. It did include some cool additions though, adding a run button, adding more in-depth combo system, having multiple tiered backgrounds, and introducing an even wider variety of ever more tongue-in-cheek finishing moves. Of course, they've included the arcade version here, but what's more interesting is the choice to include the Genesis and SNES versions, but not the PlayStation version, despite including PlayStation versions of several later games, so obviously there's no technical reason why they couldn't have. The reason this is a strange choice is because Sony originally paid for Mortal Kombat 3 to be a 32-bit console exclusive for the PlayStation's launch window, and a big deal was made about Ed Boon describing it as arcade perfect. It wasn't, but I think we know why he was so keen to sing its praises. A Sega spokesperson said that Sony had paid a cool $12 million for the exclusivity in order to give a big selling point for PlayStation over Saturn during that launch window. The 16-bit versions were nowhere near as iconic and important as the versions of 1 and 2, because by 95 and 96 most people were moving on to the 32-bit consoles or DOS and Windows PCs, which all had much more faithful versions. Even though 8-bit and portable versions do exist, they've chosen not to include them either, but I don't think that's a big loss. Again, the only real iconic version of Mortal Kombat 3 was the PlayStation 1, but the fact that Genesis and SNES versions are included is at least a nice comparison, as the Trilogy is available for both. Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 was a revised, quickly rushed out version in the same year, but it was far better received, even if only for the fact that it brought back Scorpion, as well as the other missing characters like Reptile, Katana, and Jade. Funnily enough, despite the big fuss about the original Mortal Kombat 3 being exclusive to PlayStation, the Sega Saturn got the upgraded Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, and it was a far, far better port. But arguably by this point, Mortal Kombat wasn't really that important for console sales, as the public were currently being wowed by 3D polygon fighting games like Virtua Fighter, Tekken, and Battle Arena Toshinden. That said, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 is definitely a big improvement over the original. It wasn't just the missing characters, it also included a 2-on-2 mode, 8-player tournament mode, and a lot of balancing was done. Certain characters had extra moves added, more backgrounds were added. It was just a far more complete and expansive game than Mortal Kombat 3 Vanilla. Included in this collection is the arcade version and only the SNES version, strangely. The Genesis version is not included, even though there was one. I have no idea why. But again, neither are really the iconic home versions. That would have been the Sega Saturn version, but given how difficult and resource-intensive that system is to emulate, I don't blame Digital Eclipse for not including any Saturn releases for this compilation. And basically, if you've got the arcade version, that's all you need anyway. Mortal Kombat Trilogy released in 1996 and is possibly my favourite Mortal Kombat game ever, despite being a ridiculous, unbalanced mess. It's basically Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, but also including many characters and backgrounds from Mortal Kombat 1 and 2. So all the benefits of the gameplay updates from the latest version, but including classic characters, including more classic versions of my favourites, Sub-Zero and Scorpion. It never had an arcade version, instead being an exclusive for the PlayStation, Saturn, and N64. Only the PlayStation version is included in this collection, but arguably that's the best version anyway for the purposes of using here. The Saturn version follows very closely behind. Maybe it's better in some ways, but it has a lot of dithering instead of transparencies, and as I said, it's not really reasonable to expect them to emulate the Saturn on this kind of hardware anyway. Some people argue that the N64 version was the best at the time. They're wrong. The restrictions of the cartridge and the N64's texture cache means that a ton of content and frames of animation are missing, as well as most of the music and the sound. But what that version did at least have going for it at the time was a lack of loading times. However, with this collection, presumably CD loading times are a thing of the past, thankfully. I'm 100% fine with only having the PlayStation version here, and frankly, I was elated when it was announced that it would be included in this collection. Often Trilogy is missed out. Things like the arcade 1-up machines usually just have the arcade versions. For me, this and the arcade versions of 1 and 2 are the peak of the series, and if I could only play those versions, I would be happy. Having multiple console versions for 1 and 2 is the most important too. Those are the console ports that people will have the most nostalgia for. Frankly, I think most fans would have been happy if they just stopped there. However, we do have 6 more games included, with only 1 version of each, mostly included for the novelty factor, but from a historical and morbid fascination point, it's cool that they are here, and it will be interesting to see how they're included with that interactive documentary format. 1997's Mortal Kombat 4 is included, and given that the number 4 is in the title, you might think that it's an important inclusion. It's very interesting from a historical standpoint, but I can't really imagine that this is anyone's favourite Mortal Kombat game. As I said, Mortal Kombat 3 and its Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 variant were very good games, but nowhere near as successful as the previous ones, because by that point, the new fashion was for polygonal 3D fighters. Polygonal? I don't know. Trilogy was a decent sales success for the consoles only, but it was kind of playing on nostalgia for the earlier titles by offering something that looked and felt more arcade perfect than the 8 and 16-bit versions of 1 and 2 that had been contemporary when they released. But Trilogy was never an arcade title. Midway knew that for the arcade follow-up, they had to go 3D to compete with the Virtua Fighters and the Tekkens and the Soul Edges and the Dead or Alives, and oof, they didn't really do a very good job. It's not exactly a bad game, but Mortal Kombat 4 is frankly embarrassing when compared to its 3D fighting contemporaries. Midway were playing catch-up, and it's just nowhere near where they needed to be at the time, frankly. Honestly, it was kind of sad to witness it at the time. It would take quite a long time before Mortal Kombat in 3D really got its true footing, and by the time they got to being actually good, they are arguably so far removed from the 2D classic trilogy as to be a completely different series in their own right. Having Mortal Kombat 4 in this collection is not really to show the series evolving, but to show why the 2D titles stopped and are considered their own thing, separate to what came afterwards. Mortal Kombat 4 basically burned the boats and said that Trilogy was the best of greatest hits for Mortal Kombat as you knew it, and everything from now on would be different. As I said, it's not really a good game, but it's a nice inclusion here because it gives a historic context and some closure to the end of the 2D titles. Only the arcade version is here and none of the gold editions, but frankly the home ports were bad ports of an already weak game. The arcade title is all you need unless you have specific nostalgia for 4. Also from 1997 we have Mortal Kombat Mythologies : Sub-Zero. Man, this game. I remember wanting this game so much. Reading previews of it in magazines, it sounded like the coolest thing ever. Coolest, no pun intended, though Sub-Zero would obviously approve. Sub-Zero was always my favourite character and my default main. Mythologies was intended to be a spin-off series where each character would get their own story-based game, which was like a platform title, but where you fought enemies and you would encounter them like you would in a round of Mortal Kombat with the same moves, etc. But in the context of a larger scrolling platforming world, sometimes fighting multiple characters at once and with story and lore expanding along the way as you progressed through the story. It sounded great. It should have been great. It turned out to be considered one of the worst games of all time. The controls are basically broken. It's an exercise in absolute frustration. There was a PlayStation version and an N64 version similar to Trilogy. Some would argue the N64 was better just because of that lack of load times, but it was, again, missing content and had worse graphics and sound. So on a modern emulation with no load times, it makes sense that only the PlayStation version is included here. Mortal Kombat Mythologies is a game that I have so much nostalgia for, wanting to play the game, looking forward to the game, that because of this, on a regular basis, my mind tries to trick me into thinking, come on, it can't be that bad, let's give it another try, a real fair chance this time. We can persevere, get good at it, and perhaps it'll actually be fun. It's not. But this is a ritual that I go through seemingly about once every year or two, and I will, of course, go through it again with this collection, and now you too can experience my pain. Mortal Kombat Special Forces was a spin-off from the year 2000, a 3D action-adventure game where you control Jax pursuing a gang led by Kano. It is not good, but it is a fun novelty addition to have here, and being that they already had the PlayStation emulator up and running, why not, I guess? I'm sure that some people owned it as a kid and have nostalgia for it, or some others will have the Mythologies style experience of wanting it to be good and playing it over and over, trying to force yourself to like it. I sympathize, I really do. Faring much better, but arguably less interesting unless you have specific nostalgia for them, are the 3 Game Boy Advance titles. Of course, the Game Boy Advance was a 32-bit system, but its portable screen had a lower resolution than home consoles at the time, so you would often end up with versions of games that were simultaneously better and worse than their 16-bit versions. Mortal Kombat Advance is basically a handheld Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, but with some elements of Trilogy included. It was not a very good port, sadly, and you would frankly have been better off with any of the 16-bit home console versions of Mortal Kombat 2. Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance was the 5th Mortal Kombat game, predominantly for Xbox, PS2 and GameCube. None of those are included in this collection, but for some reason, however, the Game Boy Advance game with the same name is included here. Perhaps because despite having the same name as the next-gen 3D console versions, of course, this is a 2D sprite-based fighting game, so it kind of makes sense to include it as a novelty addendum along with the other 2D games. It is an interesting novelty, at least, because it included a kind of Mode 7 style floor and some sprite scaling in and out. So even though it's 2D sprites, it gives an approximation of semi-3D visuals in a kind of 16-bit way that feel like something that could have been done on the 16 or maybe 32-bit systems during the launch window. The final game on the collection is the last GBA one, Mortal Kombat Tournament Edition. Despite the name, this is actually just a slightly expanded or changed version of the Deadly Alliance for the GBA that I've just talked about. It just has different characters. Basically, the main console versions had too many characters to fit on a cartridge. From what I remember, it was 21 characters, I think. So they split that huge character roster between 2 Game Boy Advance cartridges and pretended that they were 2 different games, even though they weren't. Yay. So, all in all, you might think that I've been pretty negative about most of the games in this collection. It might sound like the majority of them aren't really worth playing, and they kind of aren't, but that also kind of misses the point. The arcade versions of Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and Ultimate 3 are all-time classics of the genre, and Trilogy on the PlayStation is arguably the best possible fan service game for home console owners who loved that arcade trilogy. Everything else here is included as a kind of historic testament to just how popular those games were, how much the early consoles couldn't really hope to emulate the arcade games of the time, but they tried their darndest in interesting ways, and how the series somewhat lost its way when the world suddenly went 32-bit polygonal, and what had been the literal biggest, baddest series on the block suddenly temporarily seemed old hat and had to play catch-up and kind of fumbled the bag for a while. Digital Eclipse release incredibly good retro compilations full of museum-style content, interactive documentary elements with video footage, interviews, commercials, scans. This will be an incredible time capsule, and I absolutely cannot wait to dive in to the history of the series. And you know what's even better? There is a boxed physical copy for Switch 1 and Switch 2, and the Switch 2 version isn't a game keycard, it is fully on the cartridge. Incredible. Without a doubt, this is S tier. And while this is such an incredible collection from a third party and actually on the cartridge, I'm tempted to put it in the S tier, even ahead in front of Yoshi. But I don't think I can quite bring myself to do that. He's just so adorable, isn't he? And of course, Yoshi is a Switch 2 exclusive, first-party Nintendo game. Whereas I've played all of these Mortal Kombat titles countless times before, and this compilation is available on pretty much everything. But it's still an absolute S tier, and frankly, I cannot wait to play them again, especially on Switch 2, and the fact that all the games are on the cartridge. It's incredible. But this time, whilst also indulging myself in all of that lovely museum-style Digital Eclipse goodness. If you haven't already, you can go pre-order a physical copy of the collection from Atari.com. If you're even vaguely interested in Mortal Kombat, I highly recommend that you do. And the standard edition is only $44. Bargain. Okay, so we're at the hour mark already, I see. I kind of want to keep going because the next one is Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrator, game that I'm very excited to talk about, and I've got interesting things to say, but I know that it might take a while, and it seems like a good place to start the next part, doesn't it? Start strong with Final Fantasy VII, go all the way through to a deep dive into maybe the Virtual Boy, or should I do a whole separate episode on the Virtual Boy by itself and then go all the way to Metroid Prime 4? Yeah, that probably sounds like a better plan, doesn't it? But let me know what you think in the comments down below. I've already done a whole separate episode on Donkey Kong Bonanza DLC and another one on the Pokemon stuff combined, Legends Said A, the new trailer, Mega Dimensions and Pokopia all together. So we can skip past those announcements when we get to them, just giving a quick summary and tier list rating. I think I've enough to say about the Virtual Boy to make a whole separate episode, and I've actually had a couple of requests to go deep on it, so that makes sense. If you've made it this far into the episode, you are one of the real ones. Only about 6% actually make it this far. If you're one of them, let me know by dropping a comment. I'll be sure to thank you personally for your courtesy. Don't forget, we now have Super Thanks enabled, thanks to YouTube, and you can buy me a coffee, find other ways to watch, listen, or join our free members area and enter competitions to win official Nintendo prizes completely free at linktree/dailyswitch2. That's linktr.ee/dailyswitch2. Like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much to everyone for listening. I will catch you all very, very soon. Bye now.